Yes, good morning, Daniela. You go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Today, we are here in the Global Forum on the COVID-19 crisis and persons with disabilities, how to build back better together towards an inclusive, accessible, and sustainable world for all. I'm very, very proud and glad to greet you all on behalf of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs of the UN Secretariat in New York. And I wish, first of all, to express our gratitude and great appreciation and enthusiasm to be part of this initiative by the government of Ecuador, co-organized also by the permanent missions of Hungary, Liberia, Singapore, and the United Nations, as I said. We are, as we all know, in the midst of a pandemic, and we are going through very adverse times, which impact our lives, particularly the lives of those who might be in more vulnerable situations at times, and groups of the society that often have to struggle a little bit more than others. And I'm making reference here to persons with disabilities. So we really want in this global forum to discuss how we can respond and the way forward. How can we recover to build better a future that really is welcoming all people, being aligned to the vision of the 2030 Agenda and its 17 goals. So the Forum on the COVID-19 crisis and the persons with disabilities, this global forum, has this purpose. And for this, I'm extremely honored to invite the first speaker. Actually, he is the keynote speaker, and he will give opening remarks. And I have the honor to welcome His Excellency, the Minister Luis Gallegos, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility of Ecuador, to deliver his opening statement. Ecuador has the presidency of the Conference of the State Parties on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which, has a very important number of articles that really promote at global, but also at national level, initiatives to promote the inclusion and the leadership of persons with disabilities. And His Excellency, Minister Gallegos, was the chair of the General Assembly Ad Hoc Committee on Disability, which resulted in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And he has received numerous national, regional, and global honors and awards in his leadership and advocacy for the rights of persons with disabilities. Your Excellency, Minister Gallegos, we would like to hear your opening remarks. Thank you.
Ambassador, good morning. Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry. Daniela, good morning. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I see many friends of mine in this meeting. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for accompanying us today. It is an honor to have co-organized the Global Forum with the permanent missions of Hungary, Liberia, and Singapore, and the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. My gratitude goes to our expert panelists. I am very pleased that this forum is taking place and that we can count on the participation of outstanding leaders from many fields who share a common preoccupation for the rights of persons with disabilities, their well-being, and their active, equal, inclusive, and sustainable participation in our communities. In my current capacity as Minister of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility, as well as previous positions as permanent representative of Ecuador to the United Nations, President of the Conference of State Parties of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and former chair of the Ad Hoc Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, I recognize this global forum as another timely and significant initiative of the international community toward the realization of a universal human rights and the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the global agenda, in particular in face of the current humanitarian and economic situation derived from the pandemic. Indeed, we are facing a global matter that demands our collective efforts. With the overall number of COVID-19 cases about to reach the 20 million mark, health systems all over the world have been put to the test. Most of all, the pandemic has highlighted the vulnerability of certain groups, in particular persons with disabilities, who suffered disproportionately from the current crisis and other compounded factors. Disability is not a risk factor for contracting coronavirus, yet persons with disabilities face a higher risk of contagion. They confront the disruption of essential and supportive services, and they may meet exacerbated risk situations. Furthermore, with the closure of educational institutes, young persons with disabilities have been particularly hit hard, forced to the confinement of their homes and experienced isolation and loneliness. For these reasons, the government of Ecuador has been permanently active to respond comprehensively to the specific needs of persons with disability. Measures taken have been set out in 3 lines of action that include preventive information, a care guide for persons with disabilities, cash transfers, and comprehensive well-being measures in the areas of health, employment, education, and food security. At the multilateral level, along with the other 145 member states, we strongly supported the Secretary General policy brief, A Disability Inclusive Response to COVID-19, issued in early May. The 4 recommendations outlined by the Secretary General in this document aim at building back better societies are stronger and more inclusive, accessible, and sustainable for all persons with disabilities will guide our conversation today. Our distinguished panelists will address how the pandemic has highlighted the vulnerability of persons with disabilities and impacted their life, but more importantly, they will share with us good practices and experiences in the 4 overarching areas of action, mainly mainstreaming disability in COVID-19 response and recovery, accessibility of information, facilities and services and programs, meaningful consultation and active participation of persons with disabilities and their representative organization, and the establishment of accountability mechanisms to ensure disability inclusion in the COVID-19 response. Dear friends, we must ensure the inclusion of access of persons with disabilities to the health services at an equal basis with others, including medicines, vaccines, and medical equipment, as well as critical information that is available to access in accessible formats. However, the meaningful consultations and active participation of persons with disabilities and their representative organizations in all stages of COVID-19 response and recovery are an imperative among many other measures that put persons with disabilities at the center of our efforts. As I have stated before, every crisis can become an opportunity. It is up to us to make sure that the world will emerge from this pandemic a more equitable and humanistic place and ready to prove the health emergency can be translated into enormous support for social issues and the protection and promotion of human rights and special emphasis on persons with disabilities. I wish all the participants a successful event today. I congratulate you all for your endeavors and sensitivity in these issues at hand. We all look forward to hearing from our panelists, and the aspiration of their contribution and experience may enlighten us in a very difficult moment of humanity. Thank you very much. Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you so much, Minister. And, you know, you're still my ambassador. So apologies if by mistake I call you Ambassador, Minister of Foreign Affairs. We're very honored to have you with us today in spite of very, very hectic schedule. And thank you very much also for your long-time commitments and global leadership for promoting the rights of persons with disabilities. Having a disability myself, I'm very thankful. And also for promoting inclusive development for persons with disabilities. Thank you. We have very important panelists, as His Excellency the Minister just said, and I would like to remember all panelists that they do have a limit of 5 minutes each. If I'm going to appear to be strict, please do appreciate the fact that I'm trying to do my work as a moderator at my best, so that each panelist has 5 minutes. And after this, therefore, we will also have some time left then for an interactive discussion. And for this interactive session, the answers will have to be not longer than 1 minute. So 1 minute each intervention to allow more contributions to the forum discussion. I would like now to have the pleasure to invite the first of the quite few speakers we have in our list today. Each speaker, I repeat, has 5 minutes time. I will give you a signal at the 4th minute so that you know that you will have 60 seconds more to conclude your presentation. I thank you very much for your cooperation. The first panelist is Miss Maria Soledad Cisterna, who is the Secretary General of the Special Envoy of the United Nations on Disability and Accessibility. We look forward to hearing your message, Maria, to governments, the UN entities, and the international community for COVID-19 responses and recoveries that aim at building back better. Maria, thank you.
Thank you very much and good morning. Congratulations, Mr. Minister Gallegos, for your new important position, and thank you very much for your permanent commitment with persons with disabilities from the ad hoc committee for CRPD. Best wishes. Firstly, I would like achievements during the pandemic. Persons with disabilities, their representatives organizations from the beginning, joined their voices strongly on relevant issues. The first concern was the right to life. Persons with disabilities have the right to access intensive care units, including mechanical respirators and other supports in equal condition with others. The correct application of triage does not admit discrimination on basis of disabilities. Inclusive and participatory response to the pandemic has meant the creation of cross-sector working groups with proactive participation of persons with disabilities and DPOs with concrete results, such as guidelines, regulations to health workers, to police, among others, about health care, including mental health, violence and abuse, etc. On the other side, many local governments have demonstrated their key role to channel the inclusive and participatory response, interacting with central government to satisfy the needs and rights of the population, taking into account the views of persons with disabilities in many cases. Which are the challenges for the new decade? First, the inclusive and participatory response with full participation of persons with disabilities and DPOs should be recognized in legislation and public policies, not only in relation to the pandemic, but also in connection with other important matters of public interest with binding effects. Second, universal accessibility is a pillar and bridge for the exercise of human rights and also for the fulfillment of sustainable development. To implement accessibility means to move broadly to the eradication of poverty, and it is a key factor to revitalize the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development, SDG number 17. Third, currently, we are talking about smart cities. These cities will be really smart when they are fully accessible for the exercise of all human rights by all persons with disabilities. Technology, with its advantages, cannot be a barrier for persons with disabilities. For example, in the remote education field during the quarantine and for the future. Fourth, it is relevant to establish the inclusive governance through the multilateral political decision-making to reinforce the alliance among central governments, local governments, DPOs, private sectors, and holders to catalyze the implementation of CRPD, especially accessibility, and the fulfillment of SDGs, particularly overcoming of poverty. Finally, it is indispensable the creation of global big data on the critical issue of accessibility during and after the pandemic as a legacy for humanity to better face other humanitarian emergencies in the future, and helping member states to identify the direct connections among accessibility, human rights, and sustainable development, at least directly with 10 SDGs. Thank you very much.
You have been perfect in terms of timing, and you have set now, I suppose, the good example. Thank you very much to the Special Envoy of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Maria Cisternas, for her speech. And I would like now to ask the second speaker, the Ambassador Catalina, Her Excellency Ambassador Catalina Ana Maria Ojai from Hungary, who Hungary is a co-sponsor of this forum, to share the experience of the government of Hungary in promoting disability inclusive and the disability-specific measures throughout the pandemic in response to this crisis that the world is facing of containment, mitigation, and also recovery. Your Excellency, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, Director Daniela Bass, it's always a pleasure to see you. You are a sheer inspiration for all of us. Thank you very much for moderating and for being with us all the time. And of course, it's wonderful to see my great friend, Ambassador, the former Ambassador of Ecuador, Minister. We are so proud of you, and we really would like to work with you also in the future, and we wish you all the very best. You have been a beautiful light in our all fight, I have to say that. So, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, Hungary is deeply committed to the rights of persons with disabilities. As a Bureau member of the Conference of State Parties to the CRPD, I've been, of course, following the developments concerning persons with disabilities with great concerns. And we are, of course, all very sad that we had to postpone our meeting until December. But I just hope that in December we can have this very important meeting. As it was already highlighted, persons with disabilities, a very diverse group, including millions of people worldwide, can find themselves in situation of vulnerability during the crisis situation. In Hungary, according to the last census, the international data, 5 to 10% of the population are persons with disabilities. To protect and empower them, the government prepared an action plan within just a few days after the national lockdown that became necessary due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The plan focused first, making sure persons with special needs are visible for local governments who are responsible for providing them services. Second, ensuring a safe living environment and providing alternatives to risk-bearing direct personal contact. Third, while encouraging safe, physically distanced connection. Actually, I must say, Your Excellencies, we have had a lot of meetings in this topic during the pandemic, and I'm really very happy that we are all very much concerned and we are doing our best, recognizing that residents of care homes, either in short or long-term residential care or rehabilitation institutes, are in the most vulnerable situations. Both visits and leaves are postponed in Hungary, while access to telephones and computers was granted and their private use was encouraged. Recognizing the importance of social connections for persons with disabilities, the government of Hungary made it a priority to lift the restriction as early as possible. In order to ensure that every person with disability receives basic social services in their own home, local governments designated coordinators to build a network and identify persons in vulnerable situations within their territory and ensure access, food, basic services, medication, and information on COVID-19 prevention. They involved elderly care institutions, child care authorities, social service providers, social catering service organizations, healthcare providers, and encouraged families to establish contacts. Local governments recruited volunteers and redirected employees of temporary closed national and governmental institutions to serve elderly people and persons with disabilities. Ladies and gentlemen, the panelists, the government continuously provided barrier-free access to information related to the pandemic of its official website and sign language interpretation at all press conferences on the pandemic response. Disabled persons organizations also made specific information available via their websites, and local governments worked to ensure that local information and public services reached people, including by providing computers, laptops, and tablets, complete with selected applications and wireless networks for free of charge where applicable. And finally, while we focus on the pandemic response, it's crucial to continue ongoing efforts on the disability rights. So in this spirit, I'm happy to say, and I'm proud to say, that the Hungarian government unanimously adopted an amendment to the National Disability Act, which establishes a nationally recognized sign language exam, codifies the profession of sign language interpretation, and takes on the charges of sign language interpretation used in the healthcare service. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Katalin Anna Maria Bolyai from the Republic of Hungary. You too, you have been extremely precise. If I can allow myself a joke, a very nice joke, it seems we're all Swiss today. So, very precise. So thank you very much. And also for highlighting the relevance of technologies, digital technologies that are very useful for everyone, particularly also for those people who might have more reduced mobility, such as persons with physical disabilities or older persons. And allow me to say that I do hope this global forum will bring also further discussions during the Commission for Social Development next year, next February, that has as policy theme digital technologies and social development, where we could play another important role in bringing also the discussion about that and persons with disabilities. Now, allow me to present another very important excellency, the Excellency Ambassador de Maxwell Saha Kamayev of Liberia. You also have 5 minutes to share with us the experiences of your country and other good practices you might wish to bring to the discussion today. Please, the floor is yours. Ambassador?
Do you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear. We don't see you, but we can hear you. We can still see the smiling face of the Ambassador of Hungary, though.
Okay. Let me first renew our profound congratulations to my dear friend, His Excellency Ambassador Luis Gallegos for his preferment as Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ecuador. The permanent mission of the Republic of Liberia to the UN is pleased and honored to partner as a co-sponsor with the permanent missions of Ecuador, Hungary, and Singapore, and the UN Department of Social Affairs in hosting this very important event. This event is not only necessary, but timely, given the recent commemoration of the first anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 2475, Protection of Persons with Disabilities in Armed Conflict, a document which expands the mandate of the protection of civilians and commits to address the disproportionate impact of armed conflict and related humanitarian crises on persons with disabilities. We are all aware of the inequalities and the challenges persons with disabilities have to grapple with in our societies. Undoubtedly, these inequalities and challenges are further aggravated, particularly during this time of COVID-19. It is with this realization that Liberia joined the overwhelming support and endorsement of the Secretary General's policy brief in calling for a disability inclusive response to COVID-19 towards a better future for all. It is essential that we ensure disability inclusive responses to the COVID-19 pandemic at the local, national, and global levels through cooperation, investment, and direct support from all stakeholders. Let me therefore, in this light, extend appreciation to the UN system and our development partners for the support of the efforts of our governments, locally, nationally, and globally, to address the adverse socio-economic impact of this scourge and to ensure that no one is left behind. While we currently focus on meeting the needs of persons with disabilities during this crisis, we must all maintain the foresight of building back better with inclusivity and sustainability. The welfare of persons with disabilities must also be at the core of our post-COVID-19 recovery strategy, as it is the case with countries around the world experiencing the adverse socio-economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis. Persons with disabilities have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic in Liberia. With a focus on the well-being of vulnerable populations within the country, the government of Liberia, under the astute leadership of His Excellency Dr. George Manawia, President of the Republic of Liberia, has instituted a pillar dedicated to the welfare and protection of persons with disabilities, women, girls, and children as an integral part of the government of Liberia's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is also reflected in Liberia's national flagship development plan, the Purple Agenda for Prosperity and Development. The Ministry of Youth and Sports is charged with the coordination of the mechanisms put in place by the government of Liberia to address the needs of persons with disabilities during this COVID-19 crisis. In collaboration with the National Commission on Disabilities, the National Union of Organizations of the Disabled, and other civil society organizations, the government has implemented measures to mitigate the spread of the virus amongst persons with disabilities, as well as the hardships posed as a consequence. Through funding allocated by the government, the National Commission on Disabilities has provided subsidies to disabled people's organizations throughout the 15 political subdivisions to aid and boost in feeding programs and small businesses to lessen the burden of food insecurity and loss of income experienced by persons with disabilities. The dissemination of information to persons with disabilities on keeping safe is an essential component of the government of Liberia's strategy to curb the spread of the virus. The full
You have 15 seconds. 15 seconds.
Yes, on behalf of His Excellency Dr. George Manuel, we are President of the Republic of Liberia and the government and people of Liberia, we renew our unflinching practical commitment and support to the full implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency Ambassador, and forgive me, I'm just doing my job as a moderator. And I think the line was a little bit disturbed. I think you mentioned that you are working very closely with the Minister of Youth and Sport. And if that's the case, thank you very much. We do know that sport and physical activities are a mandate in the division I have the honor to lead in UNDESA, and it's so essential to promote inclusion, recovery, strengthening our immune system, and the well-being of persons in general. So thank you very much for that kind of contribution and very important examples you brought to the table today. I would like now to ask the following speaker to bring the experiences of Singapore. And I would like Ms. Phyllis Cho, Director of Planning at SG Enable, to bring to the conversation the experiences of Singapore. And thank you also for being co-sponsors of this forum, please.
Good morning. Singapore is honored to co-sponsor and participate in this important event together with Ecuador, Hungary, Liberia, with the support of UNDESA. The world is in unprecedented times. This is a once in several generation event. We recognize that persons with disabilities have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, and everyday friction and barriers have taken on graver implications at this time. Yet, this is also an opportunity for governments and communities to reaffirm the commitment to the more vulnerable segments of the population, and in doing so, emerge from the pandemic as stronger and more inclusive societies. Let me share a little about Singapore's experience with COVID-19. We are a very small country. We are a city-state with close to 6 million people, and the estimated 3% have disabilities. The first cases of local transmission in Singapore emerged to us in January 2020, and from early April to end of May, the country was in what we call a circuit breaker mode. Safe distancing measures were implemented, which meant that many social services were either suspended or delivered online, with the exception of essential services like residential homes and hostels for persons with disabilities. Since early June, the government has gradually reopened some activities, and with it, social services as well. Since the early days of COVID, the government has put in place a slew of national level supports, including for persons with disabilities. The focus is that no one and no person with disability is left behind in the course of the COVID-19 response and recovery. Within the community too, we saw a lot of activity with social service organizations, businesses, and the man in the street coming together to collaborate to support vulnerable populations. And we call this collaborative spirit in Singapore the SG Singapore Together movement. Our key focus was to ensure that persons with disabilities continue to have access to key amenities and services. So for the disability sector, service providers innovated as quickly as they could to support clients remotely, with government assistance such as grants to buy hardware and software. Provisions were made for those who could not be cared for at home or who needed services that could not be delivered or could not be adequately delivered by remote methods. So for example, some disability centers remain open, and face-to-face mental health interventions were provided to high-risk individuals. For some, new solutions had to be created. So, for example, community agencies proactively identified the more vulnerable people among the disability community, such as those with elderly caregivers, so that they could be given targeted supports like regular check-ins with service providers, meals delivery, home-based caregiver respite services, as well as cash relief. And these were all made possible by joint government and community efforts. So in the works now are plans to systematically identify the more vulnerable persons with disabilities so that moving forward, they may be on our radar and they may be better supported. In terms of information, this is a very, very important thing at a time like this. The pandemic highlighted the need to provide more in-depth and accessible information to the community. Singapore adopted a multi-platform, multilingual, and multi-format approach to disseminate COVID-related information to cater to the different needs of different segments of the society, including those with disabilities. So this includes, as far as possible, the use of captions or live sign language interpretation on national announcements carried on free-to-air TV. On the ground, healthcare institutions, community groups, and volunteers mobilized to create educational and informational content for persons with disabilities. However, with all this wealth of information came a situation of fragmentation, and people did not know where to go. So SG Enable's Enabling Guide website provided an accessible first-stop platform for signposting users to relevant content, all of which help to put important information into the hands of persons with disabilities.
20 seconds.
All right, moving forward, the government looks at national recovery efforts, and these include persons with disabilities in the country's socioeconomic responses. For example, the newly formed National Jobs Council will have a work stream for persons with disabilities. So in closing, we feel that by working collectively, governments with their resources and policies and community groups with their closeness to the ground can ensure that COVID-19 responses are sensitive to persons with disabilities and ultimately builds back to an inclusive society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Phyllis Chu, for your for sharing what is happening in Singapore that I visited a few years ago, and I was just amazed, and I just fell in love with the place. So thank you very much for the updates. I would like now to ask, and apologies for my pronunciation to all speakers, I'm trying to do my best. I would like now to invite Ms. Maria Gomez do Valle Ribeiro, who is the UN resident coordinator in Zimbabwe, where I also have, I would like to say very good acquaintance. I would even dare to say friend, that is the Minister of Sport and Youth, Christy Coventry. So Zimbabwe is also quite close to our heart. If you, resident coordinator, could be so kind to share with us the experiences in Zimbabwe, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for inviting us to be part of this forum and having the opportunity to highlight the situation here in Zimbabwe, particularly in relation to making sure that people with disabilities are not left behind. Let me start by making two sort of general points. One is that the COVID-19 pandemic in Zimbabwe has come on top of an already very serious socio-economic situation, the impact of drought. So if you like, it has come to exacerbate what was already a very serious and potentially serious humanitarian situation. The second point to say as well is that we have the UN family here in Zimbabwe has been engaging over the past few years with particularly the network organizations for people with disabilities. And we have, in fact, had the opportunity to see how we can mainstream, but also sort of look at ways of making the presence of people with disabilities in our programs much more visible and much more at the center. One example is the Spotlight program, which I will mention later. When we see the situation here, just to say that Zimbabwe has signed the CPRD and the optional protocol, but its legislation still on the books is not in line with the but also of the legal framework. Having said that, with the onset of the COVID-19 and the lockdown and the measures that were taken, we were very concerned to make sure that people with disabilities would get the visibility and the support that they need in already a situation where things are stretched. So if we look at some of the challenges that government has, It is actually sometimes the lack of information, the lack of data, and the lack of understanding of vulnerable groups such as the people with disabilities, and potentially what something like a lockdown of the and the situation, the impact it will have on people with disabilities. Secondly, is the capacity of the disability networks and organizations to also be able to leverage more and more visibility and importance in Zimbabwe. Having said that, I have to say that we have some very strong militant advocates and activists for disabilities here in the country, and who have, and I would like to particularly pay tribute to the two main umbrella organizations for people with disabilities. Thirdly, we continue to have a general ignorance of what disabilities is about. And so one of the areas that we have to focus on, and we've been working with disability organizations, is on giving greater understanding. With the pandemic, let me say that we focused on three aspects in the pandemic response. One was in ensuring accessibility to information on COVID-19 and to services in a format which would be accessible to people with disabilities. We also did a lot of advocacy on human rights standards in implementing COVID-19 response. And to say as well that we have a wonderful group of advocates on disabilities, of Zimbabwean advocates on disabilities, themselves disabled, people with disabilities who were able to go on television, to go on social media, and
20
to advocate
seconds.
for it. Just apart from, just to say that every crisis is an opportunity, and we believe that here in Zimbabwe, given that we're in the process of developing the National Development Strategy and also the Build Back Better framework, this is an opportunity for us to build on the experience of mainstreaming disabilities and ensuring that people with disabilities are in the driving seat on policies which affect their lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maria, our resident, the UN resident coordinator in Zimbabwe. Later on, if you wish, we might have a conversation with our section that deals with capacity development by sharing knowledge. So maybe we could work on trying to align the legislation of Zimbabwe with the CRPD. And we do also have developed a toolkit on disability in Africa. It's quite interesting. So if you wish, we could have a further conversation on that. Thank you so much. And I would like now to ask the next speaker, Charlotte Mclean Nlapo. Charlotte, you will have to help me with the pronunciation of the family name. Our colleague is a global disability advisor at the World Bank Group. And please do address with us the role of domestic and international institutions in financing effective disability inclusive COVID-19 actions. Charlotte, thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Daniela. And I'd like to thank first of all UNDESA for putting this forward, but also to thank the government of Ecuador, of Hungary, of Liberia, and of Singapore. And I think it was so appropriate to have Ambassador, now Minister Gallegos, present the keynote speech. So this is a great way to start this discussion. Next slide, please. So by way of my presentation, I would like to start off by just talking about the importance of the bank's position in relation to addressing COVID-19. And so what the bank is doing is we're taking a very broad, but also very quick actions to address countries strengthening their own pandemic responses and supporting their healthcare systems. The bank is providing up to 160 billion in financing over 15 months. And these are tailored for specific sectors: health, economic, social shocks that the countries are facing. And in this regard, there's a very strong emphasis on the importance of marginalized groups. In addition to this, we're really looking at supporting and emphasizing social protection, poverty alleviation, and policy-based financing. Next slide. The next slide presents to you some ideas of the amounts and the number of projects. So 302 projects have already started that are looking at COVID-19, and they're in 1,491 locations. Next slide. I'm going to go through the slides quickly. Next, please. And next. And then speak to some of the specific issues that we're working on in relation to disability inclusion. So as I mentioned in our general overview, there is a strong focus on marginalized groups, that is including persons with disabilities. But in addition to that, we've taken the twin track approach. And so to do that, we have engaged in strategic partnerships with donors and multilateral agencies. So we're working closely with the Global Action on Disability Network, the GLAD. I am heading one of the work streams in the UN time-bound working group on disability and COVID-19 that's looking specifically at financing. And therein, we've been developing some checklists, key messages that have been shared across the UN. Recently, we had a webinar on Cities for All with the focus of COVID-19 and urban mobility. And then we also have been part of other discussions with CARICOM and the United States Council for International Development on disability and COVID-19 in the Caribbean. Next slide. The next slide indicates the importance of our influencing within the bank. So within the bank, we have we have a set of 10 standards, the environmental social framework. And within that, there's been a big pivot to focus on adapting mechanisms to reach populations. So for instance, if you're looking at the issue around reaching communities and ensuring that we have stakeholder engagement, this process has allowed us to think about how we can use virtual consultations that are inclusive of persons with disabilities and providing knowledge to our colleagues on what that will look like. We're also looking at our various grantees. So we're working with the different parts in the bank that receive grants and ensuring that disability is that disability inclusion is being included in COVID-19 responses, and have done some very interesting work around education in Rwanda and in other places. Similarly, we just put out an issues paper that highlights the emerging impacts and sets out some preliminary steps for the bank to mitigate the impact of the bank in terms of the unfolding COVID-19 pandemic. So safe to say, we've taken an approach where we situate people at the center, but take into account social protection, transport and travel, education, health, and economic impacts. In addition to that, we are looking at some specific COVID-19 support packages, looking at health, looking at disaggregated data, looking at the importance of universal design.
10 seconds.
Looking at the importance of universal design and providing information that is accessible to all. I would like to close by encouraging colleagues on the call to look at a paper that we released last week on the importance of addressing children with disabilities during the COVID-19 crisis. And this looks specifically at the crisis that these learners are experiencing. So please do visit our website, and it will provide a lot more information and knowledge on what we're doing in this space. Thank you very much, and over.
Thank you, Charlotte. Financing for development is key, particularly when it comes to this kind of crisis for those communities and groups of the population that are most vulnerable. And when it comes to children, we say that youth are the leaders of today and tomorrow. I would say that children are the leaders of tomorrow, with and without disabilities. So indeed education and other services are essential for these young future generations to grow healthy and be real leaders to build back better. Thank you very much. I would like now to ask another colleague and friend, and with whom I had the pleasure and honor to work during these last years. And I'm talking about Vladimir Cook, who is very much active as Executive Director of International Disability Alliance, IDA. So Vladimir, if you could address the challenges and opportunities for mainstreaming disability through the engagement of non-state actors and partnerships. 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Daniela. So just to reflect for a second, before this pandemic began, we saw quite a few successes when it comes to the rights of persons with disabilities, especially over the last couple of years. We saw significant inclusion of rights of persons with disabilities in a humanitarian field, in a Security Council. Even we had resolution. Then we had a significant commitment from a number of stakeholders through the Global Disability Summit that was held 2 years ago in UK, and also through the work of the GLAD that was previously mentioned by Charlotte. So we saw quite a few successes. However, if you allow me to be frank, as soon as this pandemic hit, we saw that principles of leave no one behind and reach furthest behind were quickly forgotten. Simply, persons with disabilities have been left to die, often not just because they contracted COVID-19, but because of because pandemic left them without support services. They were discriminated in the provision of the emergency healthcare. They were not provided accessible and inclusive communication. From the very first moment of this pandemic, International Disability Alliance, together with a number of partners, engaged in several key activities, and I will bring to your attention a couple of them. First of all, is COVID-19 Disability Rights Monitor. That was it is still going on. It is a large survey. Thus far, we have 2,100 responses from 133 countries in 25 languages, where we are trying to collect really stories and feedback from the organizations of persons with disabilities from the ground on how these crises have been tackled by their governments and what they did themselves to support process. We are also collecting stories from all over the world about how persons with disabilities have been affected, and these are presented on our website, International Disability Alliance. We were also organizing Facebook Lives once a week on Monday, and which were seen by 9,000 people every week. We had also 2 large campaigns, accessibility campaign and the campaign End Discrimination, that were primarily targeting UN. So what we have learned, like I said, we learned that a strong majority of people are concerned with the socioeconomic impact of the lockdown, of the pandemics, of the stop in the provision of the services, communication, etc., etc. Most of the people with disabilities, especially in the global south, work in informal sectors such as street vendors or freelancers, and this crisis definitely prevented them from being able to continue their job. We also learned that organizations of persons with disabilities were quickly active and stepped up in a pandemic to address the gaps in government services. Many DPOs became sources of information, raised awareness, provided accessible materials, as well as distributed food and medical supplies to their members. Today, as the world is transitioning to the new phase of this global crisis, where we are starting look slowly into the building back better. We need to really recognize mistakes that were done at the beginning, and we need to not repeat those. We believe that to move forward, we need to include people with disabilities and their representative organizations in a consultation process when we are designing this process. In a post-pandemic world cannot be one in which people and organizations can revert to conduct business as usual. We need strong commitment to human rights. We need a commitment to multilateralism, and we need UN stronger than before. I believe that, and we believe that, if anything positive, this crisis taught us that we are living in a world that is deeply interconnected, and we are
20 seconds.
And we are not safe and included until all of us are safe and included. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vladimir, for all you said and shared, particularly for bringing to the conversation something so important, that is multilateralism. United, we can win. And it's a win-win formula. We really have to remember how important it is to find a space for all stakeholders, public, private sector, NGOs, and so on and so forth, academia, to talk together, and together we can win. United. Multilateralism is so key. Thank you very much for bringing that into the discussion. And now I would like to ask the following panelist, Ms. Marcy Roth, who is the Executive Director of the World Disability Institute and CEO of the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies, to address how multi-stakeholders partnerships enhance the effectiveness of community disaster response systems. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so very much to each of the speakers, your excellencies, my friends and colleagues, and to the new minister. It is a pleasure to be here with you, although on such a challenging topic. I will ask that my slides come up, and I will proceed. So the World Institute on Disability is a 37-year-old organization formed by people with disabilities and led by people with disabilities ever since. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the World Institute on Disability has been bringing folks together for global town hall meetings to discuss disability, disaster, and COVID-19 for the past 3 months. Next slide, please. During these town hall meetings, we have welcomed 633 registrants from 29 countries. We asked them some questions about their experiences with being able to serve their communities, and focusing on DPOs, OPDs, disability-led organizations, depending on what part of the world you're in. We heard the same thing pretty consistently, and that is that these disability-led organizations do not have what they need to serve their communities in disasters and COVID-19. They all felt that they were definitely or sometimes left out of disaster relief funding from foundations, corporations, and government. And almost all felt that the town halls would be useful for participating in disability disaster relief funding discussions, and that they would like to be part of an alliance. Next slide, please. They provided some specific information about the areas in which they very much need support, with, of course, funding and monetary assistance at the top of the list, but with a variety of other non-monetary needs. Next slide, please. And thus, we joined with the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies and Inclusiva to launch the Global Alliance for Disaster Resource Acceleration, bringing disability leaders and trusted allies together in disasters to disrupt exclusion and accelerate radical inclusion. Next slide, please. At our launch on July 7th, we had a variety of partners who joined us. Next slide, please. And we are happy to say that in our early launch, we have a wide variety of corporate, foundation, and DPO partners, and we'll be seeking additional partners between now and the end of this year. Next slide, please. We are pleased to tell you that we've had participation from 47 countries, from 6 of the 7 continents. Next slide, please. And our goals are very simply to disrupt exclusion, connecting with disaster-impacted, disability-led organizations, usually excluded from disaster and humanitarian relief, and
20 seconds.
And accelerating radical inclusion, bringing them together. Next slide, please. We intend to build a sustainable system. Next slide, please. And welcome the involvement of everyone working together to accelerate the response that disability-led organizations need on the ground before, during, and after disasters. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marcy. We do need people who work on the ground. It's very important to share ideas and innovative solutions, but then we do this because they have to be brought to the ground, and that's so relevant. And work together, as you said, together with corporates, foundations, DPOs, and many, many others to accelerate a sustainable, radical, as you said, inclusion. Thank you very much. I would like now to ask another familiar face, and I would say friend, and who is Mr. Alex Lebois. They are very much experienced in anything related to designing accessible technologies. So Axel Lebois is the president and executive director of G3ICT. Please do address and promote how important it is to talk about universally designed accessible technologies in promoting disability inclusive COVID-19 recovery and building back better.
Thank you very, very much, Daniela, and thank you all at UNDESA for organizing this forum and to the mission of Ecuador and other missions. This is a very important moment to reflect on what can be done after COVID-19. Today, I would like to address digital barriers for persons with disabilities. And if you can go to the next slide. The issue that we are looking at is that most of the services during COVID-19 move to virtual environments, and that goes from education to any services essentially that people have to use. And in that movement, a number of application services appeared not to be accessible to persons with disabilities. And that means persons with vision, hearing, mobility, dexterity, cognitive, or speech impairment. And that actually creates some unsurmountable barriers. And the problem is that, or the challenge is, there are in fact solutions for every single digital interface that you can think of today, but they are not implemented. So my quick presentation will be already happening around the world at the dimension of digital accessibility and what can be done about it. Next slide, please. So what we normally do every other year, we survey countries to see what's happening in terms of commitments and the implementation of digital accessibility policies and programs. This year in 2020, we had 137 funding, which is about 50% of the world population. I have to thank many of the disability organizations that are supporting our research efforts. Next slide, please. And what I want to show to you is that whether it's COVID or not, the current state of accessibility of essential digital services is lagging very much. For instance, if you see on this chart, you have 39% of countries have no policy for accessible television, and 7% have one but not implemented. So it's 46%. Same for web. 42% of countries don't have a web accessibility policy, and 4% don't implement it if they have one. And 50% of countries do not have any policy for e-government and smart cities accessibility, and 4%, if they have one, don't do it. So it's a huge proportion of countries which do not have or implement any accessibility provisions for essential information infrastructure in their countries. And among those who do, about half are still at the minimum level of income. Next slide. Slide, please. Next slide, please. Is that the we have protect the person with disabilities. And today, for instance, we have 89% of countries which have legislation to protect the rights of persons with disabilities, and 68% define reasonable accommodation. And in fact, 9% of countries nowadays include ICTs in their official definition of accessibility in their legislation. Why is there such a huge gap between commitments and actual implementation of policies and programs? Well, the response is there. Next slide. The opportunity is that right now, only 26% of countries involve persons with disabilities in policy making on ICT accessibility. So 74% of countries do not involve persons with disabilities in digital accessibility matters. And similarly, most countries do not have any resources of education or visual accessibility at university level or professional organizations. And then finally, entity that deals with digital accessibility. Same for standards. So
20 seconds.
regression analysis, that's a key success factor for countries to perform in deploying accessible services. There needs to be a much greater focus on accessibility standards and the training and certification of accessibility professionals in all sectors of activity to mainstream accessibility solutions. So at Disabilities, that's what we focus on all year long. We are pleased to report that we now have 2,500 certified professionals in 62 countries, increasing the community of leaders who can actually help implement digital accessibility. But
Alex, I don't know if you heard me, but you have already passed the 5 minutes and a half.
Yes, thank you so much. And please website at disability.org or accessibilityassociation.org. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very important to talk about resources, about involving persons with disabilities in policy making and programming, as well as adopting accessible standards and training professionals. This is the only way, as you said, to close the gap between policies and then put them in operation. Thank you so much. I would like now to hear the youth perspective. As you know, the UNDESA and the division I lead, we have also the focal point globally, not only on persons with disabilities. Therefore, I would like to ask Mr. Kartik Sowney to speak. He is the co-founder of ICE team and an artificial intelligence scientist at Microsoft. Also Queen's Young Leaders Award winner in 2016 from Her Majesty the Queen, and UN SDG Young Leader. So we would, in 2018, so we would like to hear your perspective, the youth perspective, on the potential role of technologies. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for really organizing this very important forum and for the opportunity for me to be able to share the youth perspective. As Daniela mentioned, my name is Karthik, and I'm a young disability advocate, an SDG young leader, co-founder at iSTEM, where it's an organization where we empower youth with disabilities using technology, community, and support services, and an AI scientist at Microsoft. As other speakers have highlighted, COVID-19 has had a profound impact on people with disabilities, leading to unequal access to educational, employment, and healthcare. Youth with disabilities, over 200 million of us around the world, with nearly 80% living in the developing world, have been hit particularly hard, with schools and organizations closing and institutes and organizations scrambling to figure out ways to replace in-person support that has been the commonplace in our community with virtual support, with many not being able to provide any support at all. Several students, including some of my own friends, have had to halt their education and jobs because things were inaccessible to them. Digital inaccessibility has also become particularly pertinent now, with online educational resources, pandemic-related information, among others, being inaccessible and thus out of reach to a lot of the youth with disabilities. In fact, at iSTEM, we recently conducted a consultation with young people with disabilities in India, and students and professionals shared several challenges that they faced in their day-to-day life after the lockdowns, including inaccessibility of learning management systems, inaccessibility of virtual teaching pedagogies, lack of textbooks, which has been a challenge even before the pandemic, and even lack of accessible recreation amidst the global lockdown. What was also particularly concerning was the uncertainty around the post-pandemic world, especially how it relates to young people with disabilities and their needs. Would a blind person like myself still be able to get help in the absence of accessible infrastructure, with social distancing being the new norm? I'm not so sure about that. We're talking about uncertainty of basic human rights here, the right to live with dignity and with independence. I strongly believe that even in the pre-COVID world, people with disabilities, especially youth with disabilities, did not enjoy the same basic rights on an equal basis. And COVID has only exacerbated this now. But most importantly, unequal access for youth with disabilities today highlights the gaps in everyday things that we do due to not involving us as young people with disabilities in decision-making and planning. And I don't just mean planning around disability-specific issues here. I mean everything that we do, from emergency preparedness to mainstream employability and skilling policies. There needs to be widespread realization of the need to work towards accessibility and equal opportunities for youth with disabilities as equal partners, and as well as the need to involve us in decision-making from the very start, and not really thinking about this as an afterthought. Even within the disability community, it's important to involve youth at all stages, something that I personally would like to see a lot more of. Fortunately, we've also seen some remarkable progress and youth with disabilities taking upon themselves to help others in the community and work towards a more accessible and resilient new normal for everyone. Very recently, it was exciting to see the Office of the Youth Envoy profile some of these young activists doing exceptional work to help others in simple and innovative ways. I would also like to congratulate her in particular for all of the work that her office has done for youth and the keen interest she has shown to include youth with disabilities, and for proactively opening up and creating safe spaces for us to meaningfully engage with the international community. I look forward to collaborating with many of you on similar initiatives to ensure that the voice of youth with disabilities are well represented and we all realize our common vision of a more equitable world. As Danielle mentioned a few minutes ago, we're not the leaders of tomorrow. We are the leaders of today, and we look up to all of you to help create opportunities and platforms for us to co-create a better future and a more accessible future for everyone, including all persons with disabilities, with you. Thank you so much for the opportunity again. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, Kartik. And I know Jayatma, she's amazing. She's the great voice of the Secretary General of Youth. When it comes to policies and deciding, about how these can be decided by governments and then implemented at the ground level, then I would like also to invite you, Jayatma, and everyone to work closely also with the DESA, since we then interact with governments and try to make sure that policies are going to be approved and implemented. I do really hope that we can work a little bit further in the next coming months with you and others to make sure that the theme of the Commission for Social Development next February, which is, as I said, digital technologies and how to improve social development and so on and so forth, can bring the voice and the experiences of young leaders like yourself. Thank you so much. So this closes the presentation of our panelists. I thank all of them very much for having brought to the table so many different perspectives, but all go towards one aim, that is how we can build back better by using our diverse expertise, but working united, so multilateralism. I would like, therefore, now to ask Amin Lamrabat and other colleagues, and I want to thank also my colleagues who work behind the scenes, Masumi Ono and Akiko Ito and many others who made this global forum possible together with the sponsors. We do have a few minutes for 2 questions, and then around 11:27, I will ask His Excellency Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of Ecuador, Elena Yanes Loza, to give closing remarks. So we do have about 5 to 6 minutes for 2 questions. Amin, could you please ask the very first one that we received from participants?
Okay, thank you, Daniela. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Before we go to the participant question, we have with us Ambassador from Korea, Roth Chul. He would like to ask a comment or intervene. Thank you so much.
Actually, Mr. Ambassador, I'm so sorry if I made a mistake. I'm also trying to become an expert in using technologies, and we know that the Republic of Korea is one of our best friends when it comes to issues related to disability, and particularly when it comes to the communication and technologies. It is thanks to the Republic of Korea, actually, that we have an accessibility center at the United Nations that makes all information accessible to persons with different kinds of disabilities. And much more than that, also when it comes to sport and inclusion, it's another very strong ally we have. So please do, Ambassador, share with us the incredible experiences and powerful engagement that the Republic of Korea has, including like Hungary and Ecuador and Liberia and all the others we heard today. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela, for your wonderful moderation, as well as for your good recognition of Republic of Korea's role for promotion and protection of rights of persons with disabilities. Having said that, I also take this opportunity to commend the all hosting countries for organizing this event, for forum for building better back to the normal after the pandemic. And I thank all the panelists for their wonderful presentation for this purpose. I have a special focus on the presentation by Maria Roth, I think, Marcy Roth, I'm sorry. And in her presentation, she found that the most of the disability-led organization
have a feeling that they are left out of the disaster relief fund distribution. I think this is really a serious problem. And I have to point out again that many, almost of all, the persons with disabilities are simply left during the pandemic at home without access to essential service for their daily life. And I think, I hope and believe that soon we will have access to vaccine distribution. I think in someday later, vaccine will come to us. And then I really think, in the listing of the priorities in vaccine distribution, persons with disability should be on top of the list. And then the whatever funding should be secured for that purpose. And then, this is really serious. Without vaccine, the person with disability cannot, have a normal life. It is, as a minister from Ecuador clearly mentioned, that person with disability has a higher risk of contagion. So we really need to secure the full access to vaccine for the person with disabilities. And I just would like to ask the panelists how we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And maybe we can also listen to the question of another participant who is the DPR, the Deputy Permanent Representative of Morocco. And then we can ask our panelists to reply to these two ambassadors. Please, DPR from Morocco, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be with you. And I would like to thank the permanent missions of Ecuador, Liberia, Singapore, and Hungary, as well as UNDESA for organizing this very important event. I would also like to thank and express our gratitude to His Excellency Minister Luis Gallegos and welcome him back to New York, even if virtually. The commitment of Ecuador and Minister Gallegos personally to the protection and promotion of the rights of persons with disabilities dates way back, as in the early 2000s, as you mentioned. He led the work of the General Assembly, which culminated in the adoption of the Convention on the Rights of the Person with Disabilities. Morocco was also a member of the working group, and we worked with UNDESA and organized a meeting for the Arab region for the preparation of the convention. I was there, and we worked very hardly to that. So we thank you, and we thank UNDESA's commitment on this issue. The challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic to humanity are unprecedented, multifaceted, and extremely dangerous. Unfortunately, persons with disabilities who already face situations of vulnerability are disproportionately affected by the pandemic. This is why policies to fight the COVID-19 pandemic at the national, regional, and international levels have to be disability inclusive and put the rights, accessibility, and well-being of persons with disabilities at the center of their priorities, including access to healthcare, medicines, vaccines, and social services, promotion of human rights, and the fight against discrimination and stigmatization, education, employment, and post-COVID-19 recovery. And in this regard, the strengthening of international cooperation is extremely important. Another important point is the active participation of persons with disabilities and their organizations in the formulation and implementation of policies to respond and recover from the COVID-19 is a necessity to ensure their success. Finally, of course, I would like to thank the UNSG for his brief, Disability Inclusive Response to COVID-19, as well as all the other organizations' guidances. Morocco was proud to be among the countries that have supported the joint call for action statement on disability inclusive response to COVID-19, and we will continue our work within the UN at the national and regional levels to ensure that all what is being adopted is disability inclusive. I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. At this point, I would like to ask the closing remarks of Her Excellency Ms. Elena Yanes Loza, Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of Ecuador. I would also like to remind all those who are participating and attended that all statements and the proceedings of this forum will be made available at the United Nations website, including some of the questions that we have received with answers, if possible, as much as possible. I'm sure that our panelists will be so generous to provide written answers so that we can post them on the Unable website, UN Unable website. And the answers will be given also to the questions and the comments just made by the Republic of Korea and the Kingdom of Morocco. Thank you so much. I would like then to ask again for the closing remarks to Her Excellency Maria Elena Yanes Loza, Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of Ecuador, and me personally, thanking all sponsors, DESA colleagues who have supported this very important global forum, and all participants, which are quite many, I can see that on my screen, for having paid attention from the beginning till the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear moderator, dear Daniela, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of our Minister of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility, Ambassador Luis Gallegos, and the Permanent Mission of Ecuador, I want to thank all our panelists for a very constructive event that allow us to share perspectives and best practices to build back better societies that are more inclusive, accessible, and sustainable for all persons with disabilities. I want to thank once again and congratulate our co-sponsors, co-organizers, the missions of Hungary, Liberia, and Singapore, for their outstanding commitment for the fulfillment of the rights and well-being of persons with disabilities, and the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, in particular, our dear moderator, Daniela Vaz, whose support and contribution was fundamental for the realization of this forum. We have been able to hear about key challenges and gaps facing governments in ensuring that persons living with disabilities are included and protected in the pandemic response, as well as the good practices that prove to be more disability inclusive through the pandemic responses of containment, mitigation, and recovery. Moreover, we learn innovative measures, including those using accessible technologies that are available for the benefit of persons with disabilities, and some key messages that our governments, the United Nations, and the international community must take into account for COVID-19 responses and recoveries that aim at building back better while implementing the CRPD and achieving the SDGs for persons with disabilities. This forum has allowed us also to hear directly from persons with disabilities and their organizations, which is an imperative if we are to successfully tackle the pandemic at the national and international levels. In particular, I was pleased to have in our panel a representative of young persons with disabilities who remind us of the significance of including everyone in order to leave no one behind. Ecuador appreciates the efforts made at different levels in order to support the countries in these unprecedented times and circumstances, which have put an incredible burden on the states and the population, particularly on persons with disabilities. And I must refer to children and young people with disabilities to whom the pandemic has deprived of the facilities and teachers which are fundamental to their well-being and progress on a daily basis. On the other hand, the fact of having been able to gather so many from so different parts of the world show the possibility that technologies are opening to us. As the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility of Ecuador, Ambassador Luis Gallegos, reminds us today, every crisis can also become an opportunity. It's up to all of us to make it so and build back better a world that is inclusive, equitable, and accessible to all persons with disabilities. Thank you very much once again to all of you.
Thank you to the Permanent Mission of Ecuador and Singapore and Korea and Bulgaria and Liberia and all the civil society that has attended the meeting and contributed today. It's so important to be able to build better a world after and during and after the COVID-19 response and recovery. I repeat, we do have this event, this forum available at our website, UN Unable, where we will try to post also your questions, and we will ask the kindness to the panelists to provide as many answers as possible and post them there. Be patient, but we're going to do that. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.